The morning fog clung to the cemetery like a guilty secret, blurring the marble headstones into pale silhouettes as mourners drifted away one by one, leaving behind only silence and the fresh mound of earth beneath which Armand Hale now rested, a man the city remembered as a devoted husband and celebrated investigative journalist, though those who truly knew the machinery of his life whispered different things. And it was into this uneasy quiet that Mira Hale stepped forward, dressed not in dramatic black, but in a simple gray coat that made her look almost invisible, as if she had already begun to fade from the world, her eyes fixed on the engraved name before her, while her hands trembled not from grief alone, but from the weight of a decision that had been fermenting since the night her husband died under circumstances the police had ruled an accident with unsettling speed. Myra knelt, brushing damp leaves from the grave, and pressed her forehead against the cold stone, remembering how Armand had promised her the truth would always protect them, a promise that rang hollow now that his final investigation files had vanished and strangers had begun watching their house from parked cars across the street. She stood slowly, aware that no one else was near, and reached into her coat pocket to take out a folded envelope sealed with red wax, a deliberate anachronism meant to be noticed, then placed it carefully at the base of the headstone, weighing it down with a small stone so the wind could not steal it away like so many other things in her life. The letter, written in a steady hand that betrayed none of her inner chaos, was addressed not to a person but to the world, and as Mira stepped back she felt a strange calm settle over her, the calm that comes when fear is finally overtaken by resolve. She took one last look at Armand's name, recalling his late-night phone calls, his sudden silences, the coded phrases he used when he sensed danger, and how, 2 weeks before his death, he had whispered to her that if anything happened to him, she should trust no one and tell everyone at the same time. The irony was not lost on her as she walked a few steps away from the grave, removed a small bottle from her pocket, and swallowed its contents without hesitation, knowing the poison would not bring immediate pain, but a quiet shutdown that mirrored the way the truth itself had been suffocated. She sat down against an old oak tree facing the grave, her breathing slowing as memories blurred into one another, of laughter, of betrayal, of files hidden behind false walls, of a list of names powerful enough to bury a man twice. By the time the groundskeeper returned from his lunch break, drawn by the sight of a woman unmoving beneath the tree, Myra Hale was already beyond saving, her pulse gone but her purpose intact. For the letter she had left would soon be read by a curious passerby, photographed, shared, and dissected by millions. And within its carefully chosen words lay not a farewell but an accusation, one that named dates, places, and a pattern of deaths disguised as accidents, beginning with her husband's. And as sirens wailed in the distance, the fog began to lift, revealing the cemetery in stark clarity, as if the land itself could no longer bear to hide what was buried there. The letter did not scream for attention, yet by dusk it had already conquered the city, because curiosity is more powerful than caution. And when a university student visiting his mother's grave noticed the sealed envelope resting against Armand Hale's headstone, he first photographed it, then read it, and finally posted it online with a caption that questioned whether death itself could testify. And within hours, the image spread across social platforms, newsrooms, and encrypted forums where journalists, activists, and criminals all hunted truth for very different reasons. The message was written with unsettling precision, not poetic, not hysterical, but methodical, listing names that most people recognized from headlines and television debates, followed by dates of unexplained deaths, collapsed investigations, and sealed autopsies. And at the center of it all was Armand Hale, whose final article draft, Mira claimed, had been stolen the night he died. Detective Rowan Cross first read the letter on his phone while sitting in his unmarked car outside the Hale residence, a place he had been quietly observing since Armand's death. Because Cross did not believe in coincidences, especially when cases closed too cleanly. And the moment he reached the final line of the message, which read, "If my death follows his, then you must finally see the pattern," he felt the slow burn of regret for every question he had failed to ask while Mira was still alive. By the time he reached the cemetery, police tape already fluttered around the oak tree like a cheap apology. Reporters shouting questions into the air, while forensic teams cataloged a tragedy that had already escaped their control. And Cross stood back, watching the chaos with a grim understanding that the letter was not evidence in the legal sense, but a detonator, one designed to force hidden machinery into motion. Across town, in a glass-walled office high above the traffic, Victor Lorne watched the same news feed in silence, his expression calm as the names scrolled across the screen, because he knew how fragile power became once it was spoken aloud. And Myra Hale had just spoken it to the world. Lorne did not panic, but he did make a call, instructing someone to retrieve a hard drive that should have been destroyed months ago, because Armand Hale had been annoyingly thorough, and thorough men were dangerous even in death. Meanwhile, Rowan Cross began reassembling the fragments of the original case, pulling traffic cam footage that showed a black sedan parked near the Hales' home the night Armand died, requesting phone logs that had been redacted, and reopening an autopsy report that mentioned a minor chemical anomaly dismissed as environmental contamination. And with each detail, he felt the familiar tightening in his chest that came when a case stopped being about justice and started being about survival. As night fell, candlelight vigils formed at the cemetery, strangers reading Mira's words aloud like scripture, while anonymous threats flooded police servers demanding the letter be removed. And Cross understood then what Mira had truly done, because she had not only accused powerful people, she had forced them into the open where mistakes were inevitable. Somewhere in a quiet apartment, a whistleblower who had once backed out of Armand's investigation listened to the news with shaking hands, realizing too late that silence had only delayed the inevitable. And as Rowan Cross pinned Mira's letter to his caseboard, circling the final line in red, he knew this was no longer a closed case resurrected by grief, but the opening chapter of a conspiracy that had already claimed to lives and was prepared to claim many more before the truth was finally allowed to breathe. Rowan Cross slept less than an hour that night, not because of insomnia, but because every time he closed his eyes, the letter rearranged itself in his mind, names shifting into faces, dates into funerals. And by dawn he was back at headquarters, pinning photographs and documents across a board that now dominated his office wall. each connection drawn with careful restraint, because Cross understood that sloppy conclusions were exactly what powerful people relied upon. The first crack appeared in the autopsy report of Armand Hale, where a trace compound listed as industrial residue matched a sedative Cross had seen once before in a corporate murder disguised as a workplace accident, a drug designed to slow the heart without leaving obvious trauma. And when he traced the supplier, he found a shell company that funneled its transactions through 3 countries before landing at a biomedical firm chaired by Victor Lorne's cousin. Cross requested warrants, knowing they would be denied, and when they were, he smiled grimly because denial itself was confirmation. And instead he leaned on an old contact in digital forensics who owed him a favor from a buried scandal years ago. Together, they reconstructed fragments from Armand's encrypted cloud backups, discovering that the journalist had not been chasing a single story but mapping a system, one where staged accidents eliminated liabilities and investigations were quietly redirected by financial pressure and political favors. And Mira Hale had been the only person Armand trusted with the final access code, a code she had intentionally never written down. As midday news cycles chewed on Myra's suicide, labeling it tragedy or manipulation depending on the outlet, Cross noticed something subtler, a coordinated effort to discredit her mental state. Anonymous psychiatrists speaking to the press about delusional grief, articles appearing within hours using identical phrasing. And Cross knew then that the machine Mira accused was already defending itself. Meanwhile, Victor Lorne met with his associates beneath the hum of a private elevator, assuring them that public outrage burned fast and died faster. Yet, beneath his calm calculations lay irritation, because Armand Hale had not been scheduled to die when he did, and improvisation always left residue. Lorne ordered the retrieval of the missing hard drive accelerated, unaware that Cross had already traced its last known location to a storage unit rented under a false name, linked to Myra's credit history. And when Cross arrived there with no warrant but an understanding landlord, he found the unit empty, except for a smear of fresh blood and a receipt time-stamped less than an hour earlier. The realization hit him with cold clarity that he was now racing professionals who cleaned up their mistakes as efficiently as they created them, and that Myra's letter had not delayed them but forced them into haste where errors could be fatal. That evening, Cross received an unmarked envelope slid beneath his apartment door, inside of which was a single photograph of Myra Hale taken days before her death, sitting across from a man whose face had been deliberately scratched out, and on the back, written in Armand's handwriting, were the words, "He knows where the bodies are buried," a phrase that felt less metaphorical with every passing hour. Cross burned the photograph after memorizing it, understanding that possession itself could become a weapon against him. And as he stood at his window, watching the city pulse with indifferent life, he finally accepted what Mira Hale had already known, that truth was not something revealed gently, but something dragged screaming into the light, and that by choosing to read her message, the world had unknowingly agreed to pay the price that followed. The city itself began to shift under the weight of Mira Hale's message. Subtle tremors that most citizens never noticed, but that resonated through corridors of power, boardrooms, and back alleys alike. Because once the names were spoken, once the deaths were linked, The protective veil of normalcy unraveled in invisible threads. Rowan Cross discovered quickly that the leaks had spread beyond social media. Journalists who once avoided controversy now dissected Armand Hale's final investigation, uncovering patterns of financial fraud, orchestrated accidents, and silenced witnesses. Each revelation adding pressure on law enforcement agencies to act while simultaneously alerting those who would kill to protect themselves. Cross spent hours poring over CCTV footage from surrounding streets, noting vehicles that appeared multiple times over different dates. The same black sedan that had tailed Armand in his last days, now caught on camera near other individuals named in Myra's letter. And he realized that he was not merely observing a past crime, but a living, moving network, one capable of predicting his own moves. Meanwhile, Victor Lorne convened an emergency meeting with his closest allies. Their conversation measured, full of silent threats and coded language. Yet Cross had already anticipated this through intercepted emails and minor but intentional digital footprints, evidence that Armand had left behind, knowing that someone had to see the truth, even if it was posthumously. In a small apartment across town, an ex-investigator who had once brushed too close to the conspiracy now cowered, rereading the letter and wondering if the mistakes he had ignored years ago were finally catching up. And somewhere between fear and moral awakening, he made a call to Cross, promising information that could collapse a carefully constructed empire, but demanding absolute secrecy and protection. The detective worked through the night, corroborating names, dates, and alibis. And when he finally reached the central node of the network, a corporation with charitable fronts, offshore accounts, and untraceable proxy, felt the cold thrill of approaching danger, because he knew that exposure meant retaliation. Meanwhile, the public became fascinated by Mira's posthumous warning. Conspiracy forums erupted, hashtags trended, and amateur sleuths attempted to piece together the narrative, unknowingly running the risk of being observed by those who valued secrecy above all else. In the shadow of it all, Cross began noticing a pattern in the chaos. The small discrepancies in digital logs, surveillance gaps, and inconsistencies in witness statements that hinted at a mole inside law enforcement. Someone feeding selective information to slow or misdirect the investigation. And he realized that Mira had anticipated this, embedding subtle clues in her letter designed to identify and expose the internal saboteur. As dawn approached again, the city felt eerily quiet, the streets empty of usual commotion. But the undercurrent of tension was palpable, and Cross, standing on a rooftop overlooking the skyline, understood that the pursuit of truth was no longer just about solving Armand Hale's death or honoring Mira's message. It was about preventing the next inevitable casualty, about untangling a network so entrenched that every revelation risked more than justice. And in that silence, he made a silent vow to see the conspiracy to its end, no matter the personal cost. By midweek, the pressure on the authorities had escalated into chaos. Rowan Cross found himself navigating a labyrinth of misinformation and threats, where every lead seemed designed to either entrap him or disappear into shadows. Yet he pushed forward, fueled by the memory of Mira Hale and the certainty that Armand's work could not die with him. And as he pieced together phone records, financial transfers, and witness statements. A disturbing pattern emerged. Powerful individuals connected not only by business, but by a cold willingness to orchestrate accidents, silence whistleblowers, and manipulate the media. A web so vast that Cross could feel its reach touching corners of the city he had thought safe. Meanwhile, Victor Lorne had mobilized a small army of operatives, both legal and illicit, to retrieve the missing hard drive, eliminate potential leaks, and pressure journalists into quietude. Yet Lorne underestimated the precision of Myra's foresight. The meticulous planning that embedded a trail of breadcrumbs only visible to those who sought truth relentlessly. And Cross, using a combination of digital forensics and old-fashioned detective work, traced the hard drive to a warehouse on the industrial outskirts, surrounded by security cameras, motion sensors, and guards with clear orders to shoot on sight. Undeterred, he approached with careful strategy, noting escape routes and timing patrols, and when he finally breached the facility under the cover of night, he discovered not only the hard drive, but evidence of multiple surveillance operations, false identities, and dossiers on every individual mentioned in Mira's letter, confirming that Armin had been investigating a systematic network of corruption and murder long before his death. As he downloaded the files to a secure, encrypted drive, Cross realized the magnitude of what Mira had left behind: an entire blueprint of crime that could topple careers, dismantle corporations, and ignite, but only if released judiciously. Meanwhile, back in the city, news outlets splintered into two camps: those who championed Mira as a courageous truth-teller, and those who labeled her unstable and manipulative. Yet the public's curiosity could not be stifled, drawing crowds to the cemetery, websites crashing under the weight of traffic, and amateur investigators trying to trace connections, unaware that each click, post, and share was being monitored by Lorne's operatives, who were now desperate, frustrated, and dangerous. During this tense period, Cross received a mysterious message. A photograph of a room with walls covered in the same string-in photo boards he had used in his office. But the photo's timestamp suggested it was taken just hours earlier, implying that someone was watching him. Someone as intelligent and meticulous as Armand. Someone aware of every move. A silent challenge wrapped in digital anonymity. By the end of the 5th day, Cross understood that the investigation had shifted from a pursuit of justice into a deadly chess game, where every piece, every revelation, and every misstep could cost lives. And as he sat in his office, sifting through mountains of documents and photographs, he realized the truth Mira had left behind was not merely a confession or accusation, and now it was in his hands to decide who would wield it, who would survive, and who would be exposed under the unforgiving light of reality. The revelations from the hard drive set off a chain reaction that neither Rowan Cross nor anyone else could have predicted, because once the names, dates, and financial manipulations were confirmed, they rippled outward, disrupting political alliances, corporate agreements, and the carefully maintained facades of those who had believed themselves untouchable. Cross began receiving encrypted emails, anonymous tips, and even subtle threats, each one a reminder that the players involved were aware of his every move. Yet he also noticed small signs that someone, or perhaps multiple someones, were assisting him covertly, leaving clues in digital footprints, bypassing surveillance, and exposing weaknesses in Lorne's security apparatus, all without revealing their identity. A delicate dance orchestrated by Armin Hale's planning or Mira's posthumous instructions. Meanwhile, Victor Lorne grew increasingly impatient, assembling a core team of operatives to retrieve the hard drive and neutralize anyone linked to the investigation. Yet the network he relied upon had cracks, exploited unknowingly by Cross and by the meticulous instructions Mira had embedded in her letter, which contained patterns, ciphers, and coded language that only someone who understood Armin's mind could decode. Across the city, journalists dug deeper, uncovering connections between seemingly unrelated deaths, mysterious accidents, and abrupt resignations, publishing reports that alternated between sensational and eerily precise, fueling both public outrage and panic within the circles Lorne controlled. In a quiet apartment, a former insider, once afraid to speak, contacted Cross with photographs, financial records, and personal notes, providing key pieces of evidence that revealed how carefully Lorne had insulated himself, and yet, despite the risk, trusted only Cross to handle them. For Mira's letter had instructed that the truth could only be revealed without causing unnecessary bloodshed, but Cross knew that the closer he got, the more danger anyone associated with him faced. Over the next days, Cross meticulously mapped a network of alliances, betrayals, and cover-ups that extended beyond the city, discovering offshore accounts, falsified death certificates, and contracts for surveillance on anyone who had contacted Mira or Armin, a pattern that proved the network was willing to kill or manipulate at a moment's notice. As the pressure mounted, Cross realized the investigation was no longer about solving a single murder, but about dismantling a system designed to operate beyond law and morality. And he understood that Myra's final act, the suicide at her husband's grave, the letter, the carefully timed revelations, had been a spark meant to ignite the exposure of the entire operation. Alone in his office, late one night, Cross studied a map of the city, overlaid with digital markers, each point representing a risk, a target, or a clue. And as he connected lines and circled names, he felt the terrifying weight of responsibility. Every decision could lead to justice or death. Every step had to be precise, and every person involved could become collateral. In that silence, he finally appreciated the genius and the sacrifice of Mira Hale, for she had orchestrated a revelation that demanded action, courage, and patience. And as the city slept unaware of the storm approaching, Cross prepared himself for a confrontation that could change everything, knowing that by sunrise the game of secrets, lies, and vengeance would enter its most dangerous chapter yet. As the investigation entered its 7th day, the tension had escalated to a point where every shadow seemed to conceal a threat, and Rowan Cross felt the invisible eyes of Victor Lorne's network tracking his every move, monitoring his communications, and anticipating his strategies. Yet he moved deliberately, each decision calculated with precision born from desperation and experience, knowing that one misstep could not only end the investigation but also cost lives. The hard drive, now securely backed up in multiple encrypted locations, contained evidence of crimes so meticulously orchestrated that it read like a blueprint for control, including falsified autopsies, coerced witnesses, offshore accounts, and confidential corporate contracts, revealing that Lorne's empire extended far beyond what anyone had imagined, and that those who had died accidentally were only the beginning. Meanwhile, the city buzzed with speculation. Journalists following the threads of Myra's letter, activists demanding accountability, and social media users spreading every detail they could verify, inadvertently applying pressure on Lorne and his allies, while creating a dangerous environment where paranoia could easily lead to violence. Cross, however, remained focused, leveraging both the intelligence provided by a secretive whistleblower and the subtle cues left by Mira, who had predicted that even in death, her actions could guide someone capable of seeing the full picture. And he began connecting the seemingly isolated incidents into a coherent map, each line of cause and effect revealing a network of corruption that was nearly impossible to dismantle without exposure, yet impossible to ignore without letting injustice prevail. Late at night, Cross received an encrypted video file showing a series of meetings, recorded surreptitiously, where Lorne's operatives discussed removing anyone posing a threat, including journalists and law enforcement. And the footage confirmed that the network was not only sophisticated but ruthless, prepared to eliminate evidence and lives to protect its secrets, making the urgency of Cross's mission even clearer. Simultaneously, the whistleblower provided details of an impending operation targeting one of Lorne's key intermediaries, a person who could provide testimony linking financial manipulations to fatal accidents. And Cross realized that intervention was necessary. But he also recognized that acting prematurely could compromise the entire chain of evidence and put innocence at risk. As dawn approached, Cross coordinated a delicate extraction, relying on timing, stealth, and a network of trusted allies who understood the stakes, while every moment was shadowed by the possibility that Lorne had anticipated his moves, because intelligence gathered suggested that the Empire's reach extended even into law enforcement, making every action potentially a trap. By mid-morning, the extraction was underway, executed with precision, and although the key witness was safe, Cross knew that Lorne would retaliate, that the network would strike back in unpredictable ways, and that the exposure of one segment of the operation might trigger a cascade of violence. Yet he also understood that inaction was no longer an option, for Mira Hale's message had awakened forces that could no longer be ignored. And as he watched the city stir beneath him, he felt the weight of responsibility pressing heavier than ever, knowing that the final confrontation, one that would decide not only justice but survival, was rapidly approaching. The final day arrived with a storm rolling over the city, a fitting backdrop for the confrontation that had been building since Mira Hale's suicide. As Rowan Cross prepared to confront Victor Lorne and dismantle the network that had orchestrated so many deaths and hidden corruption behind layers of wealth, influence, and fear, Cross had spent weeks tracing every thread of the conspiracy, analyzing data, corroborating witness statements, and following financial trails that spanned continents. And now the pieces had finally aligned, revealing not only Lorne's operations, but also the names of those complicit in covering up Armin Hale's murder and silencing others. A list so damning that its publication could topple governments and ruin careers overnight. As Cross approached Lorne's private estate, security systems recognized his vehicle. Cameras followed his every move, but he had planned for this. Exploiting backdoors in digital protocols, Armin had once mapped, disabling alarms, and creating diversions that allowed him to move unseen through the compound. Each step calculated, every decision precise, because one misstep could mean death. Inside the mansion, Lorne awaited, calm and unshaken, seated in a backed chair, surrounded by screens displaying live feeds of global media coverage. Knowing that the letter and the hard drive had already set forces in motion that even he could not fully control, yet confident that he could manipulate the situation to his advantage if he played his cards right. Cross confronted Lorne directly, presenting irrefutable evidence from the hard drive, the encrypted communications, and witness testimony. Each revelation hitting Lorne like a controlled explosion, the tension thick enough to choke the air in the room. And yet Lorne remained composed, arguing that the system had been necessary, that sacrifices had been unavoidable, and that chaos was a natural consequence of revealing truth too abruptly. Cross listened, his mind steady, recalling Mira Hale's foresight, Armin's meticulous investigation, and the countless lives affected by silence. And with a final, deliberate motion, he activated a secure transmission that sent all of Lorne's incriminating data to trusted media outlets, law enforcement agencies outside Lorne's influence, and international authorities, ensuring that the network's power could no longer manipulate or suppress the truth. Lorne's expression shifted from calm to disbelief as screens flickered with headlines, investigative reports, and live broadcasts confirming every allegation. His empire crumbling in real time, yet he remained dangerously composed, aware that desperation could turn the game lethal even in its final moments. Outside, the city reacted as reporters, citizens, and authorities processed the revelations, the hashtags trending worldwide, protests forming spontaneously, and countless individuals who had been unknowingly monitored or threatened now emboldened to speak. While Cross, standing on a balcony overlooking the chaos, felt the weight of Mira's final act and the resolution of Armin's work settle within him, a mixture of exhaustion, relief, and solemn respect. As night fell and the storm passed, the city's lights reflected off wet streets like shattered mirrors of truth. Lorne was taken into custody without resistance, thanks to precise coordination and the inability of his network to function under exposure. And Cross knew that while justice had been served, the lessons left by Mira Hale courage, foresight, and sacrifice would echo far beyond this single case, reminding the world that even in the face of powerful enemies, one carefully placed message, a single act of defiance, an unwavering pursuit of truth could change everything, leaving behind a legacy both haunting and inspiring for those who dared to see and act.